Museum acknowledge and honor the Abenaki, Kennecook, and Wabanaki peoples past and present, upon whose traditional lands and waterways the Buttonwoods Museum is located. I think all of you, just about all of you know me, I'm an educator here. My name is Antoine. And in celebration of Pride Month, I am pleased to turn over the floor to Tony Leone, the program director at NAGLY, the North Shore Alliance of LGBTQ youth, based in SIG. And he's going to talk to us about the sort of intersection of the mental health crisis and the LGBT community, and how to build relationships and supporting adults.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you all for having me. I really love doing these during Pride Month. It's hard to get out and do these because we have so many events going on. So I was really fortunate to get your email and be able to come out and talk about how we can help and continue to help support such a marginalized community. Right? We're really going to talk about intersectionality here and the intersection between a lot of our youth's varied identities, right? Not just the LGBTQI+ community, but maybe people of color, maybe the indigenous population, how some of those even mental health challenges and diagnoses intertwine with the youth that we serve. So, again, my name is Tony. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the program director at NAGLY. NAGLY is the North Shore Alliance of LGBTQI+ youth. We proudly serve pretty much LGBTQ+ youth and allies from across 42 cities and towns across the greater North Shore. We serve anywhere from ages kindergarten to 23, social emotional support, education, and now, within the past year and a half, mental health services as well. The really cool thing about our mental health program is that we don't take insurance, we don't need referrals, there's no money stipulations, and we have a licensed clinician to be able to provide that support. It's a really great program, and we have a lot of youth who benefit from just being able to come into a safe and brave space to really talk about the challenges that they're facing, whether it be at school or at home or out within the community. NAGLY's been around for 34 years at this point. We started 33 years. We started in '92 in the basement of the church, moved our way up to the attic of a church, and then back down to the basement of that church. And now we're fortunate enough to be able to have a 5,200 square foot space in downtown Salem that we have called home since 2014. We have about 450 youth active within the organization, which is really cool. That's just in our Salem site. We serve about 115 to 120 youth a week within our drop-in program. And within our satellite sites, those kind of vary from week to week as well, but we're seeing some pretty big numbers there, which is amazing. We do have a satellite site in Newburyport that's run out of one of the museums up there, and also the senior center, which is kind of cool, so we kind of bridge that gap a little bit. We have one in Lynn, which is located at Raw Artworks, which is a phenomenal LGBTQ+ affirming art space, art therapeutic space. And we have one in Gloucester that was run out of Unity, which is a drop-in auxiliary site. Now it's going to be our floating site that's going to spread across Greater Cape Ann, so Rockport and the Gloucester area, which is great. And again, all of our programs are free of charge. There's no referrals needed. A youth can literally walk down into unfortunately, the dark, dingy mall in downtown Salem and come into our space and utilize all of the programs and supports that we offer, which is really, really cool. So today we're really going to talk about LGBTQIA+ mental health, right? And the mental health crisis that we're experiencing right now in 2024. So we're going to start with the why. LGBTQ+ youth face more bullying and harassment compared to almost any other marginalized community. We see that LGBTQ+ youth are 4 times more likely to commit suicide compared to their non-LGBTQ+ peers. So again, I like to preference this usually when I do this with schools. I don't do it with students, I do it with teachers and staff. I still like to give a little bit of a content warning. This content is very heavy, but it's really important to talk about this. And it's important to see the stats and to be able to visually see what our youth are facing right now, again, especially in marginalized community. Rates of attempting suicide amongst trans teens are 5.87 times higher than the average amongst all other teens, right? Or the gender binary teens that aren't identifying as trans. I'm not going to harp too much on this. This is one slide and one survey that we pulled from GLSEN, which is the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. Kind of let you kind of take a look at this as I talk about what GLSEN does. GLSEN is a phenomenal resource. GLSEN is an amazing national resource that primarily focuses on school climate studies, right? Being able to justify what our schools are doing. Are they being supported? Are they not being supported, right? What can they do better? And they put out this survey result I think it's every 4 years. They don't do it every year. So this is the most prevalent data. We're waiting for the new one to come out. And you can see some of these survey results, right? I'm just going to talk about one of them. 81.8% of LGBTQ plus students within the survey reported feeling unsafe in school, right? Maybe that's because of at least one of their personal characteristics. So again, that might be their LGBTQ plusness, right? That might be their queerness. That could also be maybe they have a physical disability or a mental health diagnosis or a challenge. So there's different comorbidities and intersections there. We talk a little bit more about some of the other stats that we might see. One that I think is very disheartening for myself and working with schools within the North Shore. Again, this is a national study. This is not just focused on Massachusetts. I just want to make sure we talk about that. 58% of students reported hearing homophobic remarks from teachers or other staff, right? That's a national study. To me, that just boggles my mind that staff members would be heard in the hallways talking negative about LGBTQ plus students, right? It boggles my mind. And again, we speak to some more the negative connotation that are facing, especially those negative remarks about their gender expression. Right? We're going to talk a little bit about masculinity and femininity as we got NAGLY into this. So I broke this down a little bit more. I'm a very visual person. I like to see things in front of me to be able to conceptualize what's really happening. So when I first made this pie chart, when I pulled some of the stats, it looks a little confusing if you're looking at it. But when I designed this training, I really thought of this pie chart as an average LGBTQ plus youth's day at school, right? This is 6 hours. Pretend this pie chart is 6 hours, right? So they come into school, they're walking down the halls, and maybe they heard gay used in a negative way, right? You can see how much of that pie chart that might have happened. We see that harassment, right? Maybe they were verbally harassed, right? Maybe there was a physical assault that occurred, right? And we don't know what that verbal harassment looked like. Maybe that does tie into the negative words being used. Avoidance, this is a big one, right? Maybe that student avoided sitting at lunch. Maybe that student escaped and went to the library just to find some comfort, or went to the art or the theater program, which tends to be more of an LGBTQ plus affirming space. And then that last small sliver is that one teacher that talks about LGBTQ plus curriculum. Right? So that one sliver of lack of restrictions within that school. So you can see where LGBTQ plus youth don't feel like they're maybe a part of society, right, or a part of that average school day. Now again, I'm not speaking for every single school district. The North Shore, we're pretty fortunate. There are some outliers, I think, within different districts, but I'm fortunate enough to work with over 33 school districts within the North Shore. And for the most part, they're pretty affirming, right? They have policies and procedures that are in place to be able to protect and support LGBTQ plus students. That's not always the case for other schools spread across Massachusetts and across the nation. So just a nice little visual representation of what a potentially LGBTQ plus student might face in a non-such supportive school district. So has anybody heard of the Trevor Project? I love the Trevor Project. So I have their cards over there. They're phenomenal. I highly recommend them. If you want to do more, find some more information, research, educate yourself. The Trevor Project has everything you can imagine. Feel free to obviously email me, but the Trevor Project has resources at your fingertips that you can pull. They also put out a survey, but they put out a survey every year. They usually survey about 36 to 38,000 youth. Right, and these are some of the stats and the generalized conception of what we're seeing. So I broke it down from 2021, 22, and 23. Obviously, they haven't released 24 stats yet. But what I really want to focus on is the aspect of the youth who wanted counseling but couldn't receive it. Right, we talked kind of organically here about the system is broken, right, and we have a lot of youth that are crying out for that help and that support. So we see in 2021 there was about 48% of LGBTQ plus youth who wanted counseling from some sort of mental health provider, whether that be a one-to-one counselor, whether that be a family therapist, whether that be a peer support specialist, whether it be somebody that can work with that student one-to-one to talk about not just their LGBTQ plusness, but also other intersecting aspects, right? Mental health challenges, how to get through the school day, right? Different aspects. 2022, that number jumped to about 63%, right? So now we're seeing 63% of LGBTQ plus youth that wanted that support. Look at 2023, jumped up to almost 83%. So we're seeing the need, right? We're seeing that the youth are crying out for that support. Now that could also mean that more youth are asking for that support, right? And maybe now it's being kind of visually represented. But there's also that aspect of there aren't always enough people within the field, right? I think that's the hard part. Some people, I have a master's in psychology, right? But I don't have a licensure, which means I can't do private practice. So there's so many different layers of being within the mental health field that makes it a little bit more challenging, especially if you're not a gender-affirming therapist, right? Or somebody that maybe doesn't specialize in gender-affirming care. So there's always going to be barriers, right? I think that's what I really wanted to make sure we get across here. So we're really trying to work on navigating and mitigating that. And I think NAGLY and other LGBTQ plus specific organizations really help with that, right? Because we can mitigate the fact that we can kind of handle it in-house in a way, like we can work with our youth and maybe get them to a point where, yes, they still need an outpatient therapist, but at least we can get them stable enough essentially to go in for the night. We're quite literally doing triage work. We're trying our hardest to get our youth stable enough to be able to go home and participate in daily activities until they're possibly waiting for an outpatient therapist. We do crisis screenings, right? So we make sure that our youth are able and stable enough to go home for the night. Our mental health clinician, as of last June, so year to date, has done 52 crisis screenings in our space. That's a lot for not a crisis space, right? So we try our hardest to make sure that we're able to screen, to make sure we provide a higher level of care if needed, but also we do that in a safe and brave environment. Any questions about this kind of so far? Yes, please.
The could not receive, is that broken down into like financial barrier, availability of a counselor, is that?
Yes, so unfortunately I couldn't find the actual breaking down of stats, but I know the majority of it is barriers related to insurance issues, right? So that's the hardest part, is Mass Health only covers specific things. Blue Cross Blue Shield, you need to have a licensed clinician to be able to do private practice, to do any type of therapeutic work. So it's really dependent on the insurance barrier, especially for Massachusetts. We have a really hard time with insurance trying to navigate that. Some of it is paying out of pocket, right? As we know, private practice, to be able to bill their own insurance, if you pay out of pocket, it's a lot of money, right? And some people can afford it, some people can't. A lot of our parents are just trying to get their youth as much support as possible that they will pay out of pocket for private clinicians, right, just to be able to get them into that support. So the majority of it is insurance barriers, which is very challenging.
So
Trust me, I actually had a sit-down conversation myself. I also work for Children, Friends, and Family Services, part of JRI, Justice Resource Institute, and our executive director and vice president, we sat down with Seth Moulton, who developed this whole mental health curriculum a few years back. And we talked to him, we were like, thank you for doing this. This is amazing. He started 98 and all of these amazing numbers, but there's so many things that can just be fixed by tweaking just a little bit of those insurance barriers. Just a side note, within my side gig counseling, we have to bill our own insurance, so we have to go and get authorizations. It is a pain to go through and get an authorization code just to be able to get a youth service. So there's barriers, unfortunately, on both ends, which is very tricky to navigate. Yes, it should be easy to fix. I completely agree. So I'm not going to go over these. I am going to send Antoine these, so you can feel free to send these out to anybody that like them, just to kind of dive a little bit deeper. Probably should have preferenced this, but usually this conversation, training, presentation is 2 hours. I'm not going to have you sit here for 2 hours. So I'm going to kind of go through some of the slides and not go through all of them in depth. But I really wanted to break down what we're seeing right now. Now, we are trying to get rid of the considered suicide. We don't love that connotation of consider. So we're really trying to work on rates of people thinking about suicide, right, or having those thoughts about suicide. The consider is a little bit heavy, so we're trying to kind of retract that. But we kind of look at what this looks like, right? I think what I really want to harp on this image is that core age range, right? That 13 to 17 that you're seeing. Within our space, we skew really young. So we have a ton of middle schoolers that participate in our programs. So I skew that to 12-ish, 11 to 12 to 17. That's really our core dynamic right now, and the youth that need that heightened level of support. You know, it makes sense, right? They're going through puberty, they're going through those changes, right? Maybe they're identifying as a different gender within their younger years, right? Maybe they're trying to figure themselves out. Maybe they're not ready for that quite yet, right? So they're experiencing these challenges sometimes in their head that they can't express to other people, even if they do have a safe and supportive adult in their life. We'll get to that in a couple minutes. So I did break it down again even more. I'm not going to go super in depth on this, but you know, we can see the discrimination rate, right? Again, this is the past year, so this is 2023. So I'll just kind of give you a second to take all that in. So also, I think a lot of people know this, but I just want to make sure there is a distinction between gender identity and sexual orientation. I just want to make sure we do talk about that. We're not going to go deep into gender spectrum. That'll be a training for kind of a 201. But I just want to make sure that we do at least kind of split that. There is that difference there. This is an onion. So the reason why I put this, right, is, you know, I know this might sound a little bit corny, but at the same time, it's true, it's important. We all have layers, right? So kind of peeling back those layers and getting into that intersectionality. A lot of youth have different intersecting identities, right? They might have some intense mental health challenges, right, that they're struggling with. But their LGBTQ plusness might be on top of that, right? That might not be their main focus or their main challenge right now. It might just be getting through the day because of some cognitive delays or some, you know, intellectual challenges that they may face. Maybe they're on independent education plans in school, right? Maybe their identity plays a small role into that and or their sexual orientation. So it's really working with our youth kind of on that aspect of what is the biggest challenge right now that you're facing, but also understanding that their gender identity and or sexual orientation probably play a role in that somehow. Again, intersectionality, right? Intersectionality is the balance between our merging identities and the singular lived experience that comes as a result. The reason why I really want to touch base on this is talking about the autistic youth that we serve, neurodivergent youth, right? So we have a lot of neurodivergent youth within the space. You know, some have ADHD, some have autism, right? So making sure that we do address that spectrum, right? Because autism is a spectrum. This is 70%. In our space, we're at about 85% of our youth identify somewhere within the autism spectrum. So really making sure that we understand that connectivity between the LGBTQ plus community and the autistic community. There is a big overlap there. So, advocacy, we touch a little bit on this, right? Kind of what we can do and what our youth do to advocate for themselves on a sometimes daily basis. So we're going to get away a little bit from some of the stats that we see and move on to what that advocacy and self-empowerment looks like. Kind of what we can help our youth do, right? So this is kind of more of what you all can do as supportive adults. What we teach our youth, right, within our programs and services, but also with schools should be doing, right? And some do, really working with the schools on this as well. Standing up for oneself in the face of challenges and adversity, right? So helping to guide our youth standing up for themselves, right? It's not necessarily the onus on them to make that change per se, but as supportive adults, we can help navigate that. Right? We can make that change and help make that change. Excuse me. Being proactive versus reactive as a community. This is so important. So I think sometimes we react to situations, right? And we react maybe with anger or volatility, right? Now, sometimes that's okay, right? Defending ourselves, right? Those are things that I think we all need to do at times. But maybe being proactive in the face of adversity can be a little bit different than the reactivity of facing somebody down or getting mad and beating somebody up, right? So we teach our youth, how can you be proactive in the moment, right? How can you utilize coping mechanisms? How can you work on tolerance? I hate to tell our youth that they have to be tolerant sometimes, That is not fun to have to do. But right now in the world that we live in, right, the political climate, we have to tolerate some things. That's just how it is. So we work on what that looks like, right? What are some things that you can work on? How can you be your true authentic self within our space and slowly work on that to be your true authentic self out in the community that you are involved in, right, or at your house. We're fortunate to be able to have really supportive parents. Most of our parents that drop their kids off participate in the actual program themselves. So I think that's one area that we're really fortunate enough in, especially in Salem, in such a diverse community. We don't have many parents that don't know their children come to NAGLY. I think that's amazing. That's not the case for other NAGLYs or other LGBTQ plus organizations within Massachusetts and within the country, right? Tools and coping strategies I think are really important. We utilize a lot of things that we can do with our youth. So we really, really encompass like safety plans with our kids. So like, what does a safe person look like to you, right? When people think of safety plans, they think of like crisis intervention and how to cope with intense and intrusive thoughts. But sometimes when I think of a safety plan, I think of like, okay, what does safety look like for you, right? How can you be safe at home? How can you be safe in your community or at school, right? So developing those plans, developing those strategies to be able to do that, right? And practice those things in the moment. Adult supports are huge. We need to know and let our youth know that they do have adult supports. But I think as adults, we need to make sure we show that too. Right, coming here, this is definitely one way, right, to show that. It was interesting, I was on a panel last night, and we talked about gender allyship, right? What does an ally look like? And it was interesting, every single person on that panel, including myself, saying that there are so many pressures when it comes to being an ally, right? People want to be like the best ally in the world. You can be a vocal ally, that's amazing, or you can be a quiet ally and still support people within a community that you might not represent. Right? You can still advocate. So adult supports look different to every single youth that we serve. Some parents are super involved and march with us in the parades and have pride flags hanging proudly within their houses. Some adult supports, maybe show their kids and let their kids know that they love and support them on a daily basis, right? So there's so many different aspects of what a supportive adult looks like. But I also think not putting a lot of pressure on yourself as a parent, as an ally. Just know that to love and support your child is the biggest thing that you could possibly do. Kind of went off on a tangent there, but the biggest thing that we talk to our youth about is not necessarily relying on peer supports. I think, and sometimes there's a little bit of overlap there. I think when we talk about peer supports, it's really important to have friendships, right? We want our kids to socialize, we want our youth to have those important connections with other youth their own age. It can get a little bit dangerous when they rely on their friends to be able to maybe cope with challenges that they're facing. And I think that more means, what our youth like to say, trauma dumping, right? Or utilizing that friend as their only support mechanism. That puts a lot of pressure on that other youth, right? So making sure that if you are that peer, you say, hey, let's go talk to this trusted adult together, right? Or let's find a trusted adult to make sure we have those conversations. I just think that really helps to mitigate some major issues there. So, resiliency. We're not going to go too far into resiliency, but what I really want to focus on here is how we talk about resiliency to our youth, right? The way that we do it, let me backtrack. So, coming out of COVID, right, coming out of the pandemic, coming out of the isolation period, we knew that our youth were struggling. I mean, there was absolutely no doubt about that. All youth are struggling, right? But especially marginalized communities, right? We know that. We see the stats, we see the numbers. Coming out of isolation for 2 years, some of our youth. And they came back into the space, and we opened up pretty early because we knew we needed to. And to be blunt, we made sure we coddled our kids. We did everything we possibly could to make sure that they were just safe, right? We didn't instill a lot of resiliency. Even though we knew that, again, that political climate, right, and people outside of our community might not have been as supportive. So now we're really starting to transition into that resiliency. We still are a safe space, but we're also a brave space. What does bravery look like, right? What does being courageous look like? So education. educating ourselves, right, and others on how to be a safe and supportive person, how to be an ally. You know, if you represent a community, great, it's amazing. Advocate for your community. You know, if you don't represent the community, you can still advocate as an ally, right? Just remind yourselves that maybe you don't represent, you can still advocate. Communication, right? Being able to communicate how you're feeling within those moments. If you're a youth struggling to come out, or struggling with your gender identity and or sexual orientation, or other aspects of your life, right? How can you communicate that to a safe and supportive adult and or your parents? Again, that tolerance aspect, right? I hate that we have to build tolerance, but in a way we do. And I think tolerance looks different to everyone, right? Some of our youth, and we shouldn't have to tolerate hate, I get that. But some of our youth, I think, want change yesterday, right? And I love it, that's amazing. But we have to be mindful that change does take time, right? And we can work with our youth on that. We can be a support and show them how to make that change in the most appropriate manner. Again, using adult supports. These are just kind of some mental health tools, but really utilizing tools and mechanisms that work for our youth in the moment. And these are all things you can do, whether you're a parent, whether you're an ally, whether you're just a trusted adult in the community. You can work on these things, especially if you work in different youth serving organizations, right, like the YMCA or different mental health facilities or specialties. Has anybody have questions so far about resiliency? This is a big one. I think this is super important to know. This is something that I just added to this slide a few months back. These are the rights and responsibilities that LGBTQ plus youth have within public schools within the state of Massachusetts. Okay? These unfortunately aren't laws, right? They're not regulations per se, but they are the rights and responsibilities. The reason why I put this up here, again, a lot of schools do great work. A lot of schools are trying to make that change. Some schools, unfortunately, aren't quite there yet, and maybe sometimes higher administration is sometimes refusing to make that change or not ready to make that change. This is something you can go to that school and say, hey, in the state of Massachusetts, we have the rights and responsibilities to protect our children within our schools, right? Our LGBTQ plus and our marginalized youth that we serve. This is straight from GLAAD, which is the gay, lesbian advocacy defender group. It's phenomenal. It's a legal defender group. They are amazing. They are Boston-based, but they do have headquarters across the United States. If you reach out to them via email or call them, you will get a response within 24 hours. And usually it's a free session or a free consult to chat with them. They are amazing organizations directly from their website. So I think it's just really important to make note that, again, public schools do have these rights to protect their LGBTQ plus youth. And again, all youth. Again, I'll send you so you can kind of take a look more at it. So now kind of navigating what you all can do or continue to do, right, as supporting the safe adults. This is something I developed a few years back when I first started doing these trainings. It's a cool little like three-pronged approach. A lot of this is for providers, right, or people that work directly with youth, maybe one-to-one, right, or in a group setting. What we can do, right? We can listen, validate, create open space for active listening. Active listening, I think, is key when it comes to our youth and working with our youth. This is always a tough one, right, for some people. Learning to adhere to pronoun usage and nuances in terms of vocabulary. We all know that vocabulary is changing, and it's hard, right? I still make mistakes. I'll be the first one to say, like, I am still making mistakes with our youth sometimes, right? But what we do is we quickly correct ourselves, we move forward, and we try our best the next time, right? That's all we can do. But continuing to educate ourselves, right? Continuing to take a step back, doing some research, maybe make a cheat sheet of how you can kind of remember these, right? But it's super important to try your hardest to adhere to those usages and the gender identity, the names that our youth are using. Education, right? We're not machines. I think that's something I always like to specify. We're going to make mistakes. We're not perfect, right? We just continue our education. We attend trainings. We attend speaking engagements, and really reaching out for support and assistance. Reach out to other safe and supportive adults. Reach out to allies, right? To be able to say, like, hey, I'm struggling with this. How can we work together on this? Really, really important. So being a safe person / safe space, we kind of just briefly talked about this a little bit, but I think these are really important steps. Again, if you're working one-to-one with a youth or with a client, I think this can really, really help. Now, if you're walking by someone, you might not always do all of these things, I get that. So for me, right, whenever I do a training, whenever I do a speaking engagement in front of people that might not know who I am, I always say my name and my pronouns, right? Now, when I'm walking through the halls of NAGLY, I'm not going to say, Tony, he, him. That might not be organic, so you kind of, it's important to utilize your pronouns, right? I think from a gay male individual, I think it's important to represent ourselves. But there is kind of moments where it might not be the best environment, right? I say that because some youth aren't fully out of the closet, right? Some youth don't want to use their pronouns in front of select people. So pronouns, I think, are important. It's a way that we identify ourselves. But sometimes in a public setting, it might not be ideal. So if you're working one-to-one, or if you see somebody, maybe in a private space, that's where I might say, like, hey, I'm Tony, and you see his pronouns. Do you mind sharing your pronouns, right? Not saying what are your pronouns, right? Because that puts a little bit of that pressure on that person. Because that person might come back and be like, why are you asking me that, right? Or that person might say, ooh, I'd rather not share right now. Totally fine, right? That's the case. But it still gives them a little bit of that autonomy to say, like, oh wow, somebody's asking me this, right? That's kind of cool. Like that's a cool thing to do. And it's really the beginning stages of building that rapport. And again, trying to identify yourself as that safe person. I know SAFE looks like it's an acronym. It's not. I just wanted to capitalize it to make sure we know what it is. I also noticed that there's a lot of space after that. What's that? Some other ways, right, that we can represent represent ourselves as an ally. Wearing a pride sticker, right, or having a rainbow flag, having something that's a visual representation if you identify within the community, or if you advocate and are an ally for the community. That can also be tricky, right? Why do we think that can be a little bit tricky? This is where I ask the audience. Why do we think a visual like that can be challenging at times? It's kind of a trick question. Anybody have any idea? So it can be, please. Sorry, hands up.
Because I'm kind of answering it a different way. I work with senior citizens.
Sure.
So that, it was a different era.
Yeah.
I always wear my little heart, rainbow, and I notice people definitely looking at that, and I can tell that there's some people open up to me.
Sure.
And as a result of that. So, there may be some people that are you gay? And I'm just saying, I'm saying, like, so, I've noticed that people, when I wear that at work, yes, it's not just people coming in as senior citizens for assisted living, it's also the children that are like, people that judge me, this is holy fees, and then there are also people that I found, because I work with dementia, who were closeted.
Yep.
And so then that's a whole nother.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I'm going to go on a small little side tangent. I used to work at Crookston Village. Is anybody heard of Crookston Village? Is that where yeah?
No.
Oh, okay.
More local, but.
Yeah. So I worked there for like 10 years when I was going through my adolescence, and I wasn't out at that point, right? So I was still in the closet, wasn't comfortable with myself by any means. Not because I worked there, just didn't feel comfortable being myself there, right? I went back 3 years later as NAGLY to go train or to do a presentation with some of the residents there. And it was so interesting to sit there in their big chapel that they have with 150 residents that wanted to come to this presentation to learn more about how to support their grandkids. And about 5 or 6 of them came up and said, I haven't been able to be my true authentic self because I didn't feel safe coming out, right? Especially when maybe they were, I hate to say back in the day, but back when they weren't at Crookston Village, right?
Hey, I have some kind of girls, so.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah. So it is so important, right? And I think a lot of people now know what that means, right? It doesn't have to mean that you identify it, that you represent it. It can mean that you advocate, right? And then you have that support for, again, a marginalized community. But going back to kind of why it can be challenging, I think we have to be really mindful as a community of being performative, right? So we see that maybe during Pride Month, right? We see that some big businesses, right, like to launch Pride gear, but then pull it away right after June, right? So it's like a little bit of that performative. Now, I sometimes like that because it's like, okay, they're still advocating, right? There's still Pride merch, but then they just retract it, right after June. The reason why I talk about this is that because I kind of saw it firsthand. I went to a school about 2 years ago, now 3 years ago, and I was walking down the halls, right? And we have those little Pride stickers over there. There was a Pride sticker on one of the doors, right above the handle, right? I'm like, great, maybe that's the GSA classroom. Maybe that's just a super affirming classroom. We walked down the hall, sticker on the door, the next door in the same spot. Sticker on the door in the same spot. So I'm like, okay, great. You know, trying to be devil's advocate, maybe the entire school is a safe and affirming space. Or maybe somebody just bought a roll off Amazon and slapped it on the doors, right? So it's like, I hate to think that way, but we don't always know. So the reason why I bring that up, you might have a teacher, right, who maybe is supportive, but maybe walks into their classroom, doesn't know that the rainbow sticker is there, and has a student walk by and see that rainbow sticker and says, oh my God, I can talk to this person, they're a safe person. Again, maybe that teacher's amazing and super supportive, but maybe they don't have the education around how to support that student, right? So it's just being really mindful of just slapping stickers on things, being able to have even just a minute amount of like, hey, I'm a supporter, right? Hey, I'm here to support you, or hey, let's look up this information together. We don't have to have a full table or bookcase full of resources, but at least just have a little bit of like, yeah, I'm an ally, great, I'm a support. So again, not to say that school did anything wrong. I think they had really great intention. I just think from my perspective, it was kind of like a little bit performative in a way because you don't know who was in that classroom and maybe who actually did support that community. So just being cognizant of that. Validation, I think, is really important. I know is important. Really trying your hardest to use correct pronouns, right? And correcting yourself if you make a mistake. Just do it quickly, right? Don't harp on it. Don't sit there and say, woe is me, I'm such a bad person, like this is the worst day of my life. Because what happens if I were to react that way? It brings it back to me, right? And that person feels bad. So it's really trying to correct yourself and move forward. Just say, I will get it right next time, or I will continue to work on this, or you just say, I am on your side, I am an ally, I will support you. I just need to work on this a little bit more. Like being honest and upfront is really key. One thing I also like to preference, and I think it depends on the age and the maturity level of the youth or the student that you might be in front of, but if for some reason, right, and I can say this from experience, if you're struggling with someone's pronouns, right, and or gender identity and or sexual orientation, sometimes saying, hey, let's work on this together, right? Not putting the onus on them, not saying like, hey, figure out how to make sure I get this right, but more or less saying like, hey, I'm 100% a support, but I'm struggling with these pronouns, right? Let's educate let's work on this together. It gives that person a little bit of control, right? It gives that person a little bit of like, oh wow, this person wants to work with me. So being mindful of that, again, not putting the onus on that student, but also saying like, hey, you know, I want to work on this with you. I want to make sure I get these right. Let's figure out some tools to work on this together. Does that kind of make sense to everyone? Yeah. And then, again, if you're working with a youth where maybe the family or guardians don't know about that student or that youth's sexual orientation and or gender identity, confidentiality is key. I can't stress that enough. Whenever I do these trainings for schools, I sometimes get teachers saying, well, what do we do in the case of a student coming out? You know, do we talk to the parents? And I would say, no. Like, we want to make sure we ensure that confidentiality as much as we possibly can. And that school should be able to back that teacher up if they do that, right? And so there are maybe moments and there are some cases, right, case by case, where maybe it's a safety issue or there's an emergency or whatever where it might slip or, you know, the wrong pronouns might come out. But I think the reason why I bring this up, we actually had a youth who used to come to NAGLY, and still does, that wasn't out to their parent, right? Now, their parent knew that they came to NAGLY, right? But I think their parent assumed that they just came as an ally, and maybe the parent wasn't ready to fully accept or understand. And that youth came up to me, running up to me when their parent was picking them up, saying, please use this name in front of my parent, and please use this pronoun. And I'm like, well, okay, slow down. Like, let's talk about this real quick. Like, what do you want me to use in front of your parent? You know, what pronoun, what name do you want me to use? I totally adhered. I said, sure, I will do that. To be honest, internally though, that hurt. I hated detonating that child in front of that parent, right? And just so everyone knows, detonate is a name that they no longer use. It is really dead to them. It's not their name. They use a separate name now. But for me, that really hurt. But of course, I had to pull myself back and be like, I can't let that bother me, right? I'm supporting that youth. That youth feels safe that I was able to do that for them, right? So it might be hard in that moment, but really assuring that youth is heard is the most important thing that we can do as an ally. Even though we might have to use a different set of pronouns and a different name in front of somebody that they're maybe not comfortable coming up with yet. Now, normally, when that happens, and with this youth, I did this exact same thing, because they were a little bit older, I didn't necessarily just kind of stop there. I did that, but then the next time they came in, I said, hey, I was like, you know, we didn't get to really touch base after this. I just want to touch base real quick. You know, first off, how do you feel about this? Just debriefing with them. And I said, you know, can I ask you a question? I was like, why don't you feel comfortable coming up to your parent regarding it? Now, they didn't disclose any physical issues, right, or any safety risks, but it was more they just weren't ready. They didn't know how their parent would react. So I said, great. I was like, can you and I work on a plan to maybe start to come out to your parent, right? Is that something we can do? Not rushing it, not pressuring that youth, but saying, hey, I'd love to get to a point where you can feel yourself in front of your parents and you can actually live your true authentic life at home and not just in the space. And we did, and finally they were able to utilize their pronouns and the name that they go by. So sometimes it helps to kind of encourage a little bit, not push too hard, but encourage that youth and say like, hey, I'm on your side, I want to work with you on this. You know, if it's an immediate safety risk, okay, that's a different conversation. But if it's something that you can help that youth and guide that youth, especially as a provider or as a direct care worker, even, you know, within different organizations, we can help navigate that. Roger. We're gonna not touch base on this yet, because that can be a whole training. So I think what I really want to make sure we preference, and the reason why I'm doing this, what I really want to talk about is, again, continuing to affirm and support our youth, right? So what we talk about at NAGLY is respect, affirm, educate, right? We respect our youth, we honor our youth, we educate our youth, right? It's right in our mission statement. But we also affirm our youth for who they are in their true lived lives, right? Their true authentic selves. But we also educate our youth, right, on how to be people within the community, right? Just general teenagers, right? Not even putting aside all of their intersecting identities, just being a person within the community. We try to educate, we try to make sure that we can do that. Okay. So really what being an ally means, right? And we're gonna not really end on this. I want to circle back a little bit to a small little activity. But I really want to wrap up kind of this part of it and make sure we leave plenty of time for Q&A and talking about some resources. So being an ally, right? What does an ally look like? I know we talked about all of this. An ally is kind of up to our interpretation in a way, right? It's being a support. It's loving that person for who they are and how they identify. Last night in that panel, it was interesting because one of the questions that we got, it was an anonymous question, how do we know if our youth or our child isn't just going through a phase? Maybe they are. Who cares? We're going to support them no matter what, right? So it's really it's not justifying like, okay, well maybe it's a phase, maybe they'll grow out of it. Okay, if it is great, we're still going to guide them and love and support them, right? If we were to say it's just a phase, you'll get over it, they're going to rebel, right? They're going to say like, no mom, no dad, like this is who I am, right? So it's making sure that you support them unconditionally no matter what. That's being an ally. So using their pronouns, right, or trying your hardest to use the correct pronouns, again, you know, working on it. If you make those mistakes, it's going to happen. Accept their gender identity, they want it. Use the name they call themselves, right? And the reason why we talk about this is somebody's gender expression might be totally different than their gender identity, right? I identify as a gay male, right? I'm a cisgender gay male. But I like to kind of gender bend a little bit, right? Like today I'm wearing formal clothes. Normally I'm wearing like shorts and a t-shirt and I dress up pretty good. So, but sometimes I like to wear like a cool, like colorful blouse or like maybe some cool like pants. Like I love the artistic look. So it's kind of one of those things where I might go to the feminine aisle, right, and pick out a cool blouse, but I might also wear like khaki pants, right? I don't care, right? My expression doesn't identify who I am as a person, right? I'm Tony. That's it. So I think it's just really important to some people make those assumptions of like, ooh, is that a guy? Is that a girl? Like, we want to try to avoid that as much as we can because it's not any of that. That's Lewis or that's Jeanette. That's it, you know? So yeah, regardless of their name, right, on their birth certificate transcript, you know, again, if we work kind of within schools or if we're a social worker or, you know, we work in those private settings, I know sometimes that can be hard. If anybody is within the provider field, right, we have different online portals that have people's names and his medical records, right, and billing insurance. Sometimes we have to use legal name, right, or their dead name. So it's really important to note and say to that youth, especially if they're a little bit older, hey, I know this is on there, I will never use this name, I promise, but I have to use this for legal documentation. Maybe that's a transition period where we say, hey, you know, is there a time where you want to start working on a name change, right? And you want to talk to your parent about this, or if they're 18, how does this process work, right? So again, we can kind of help navigate a little bit on that journey, but really allowing that youth or that student to guide their own journey, right? And you're just kind of there to help support. Really trying not to assume, right, their sexual orientation or gender identity by their expression, right? Again, similar. I might not always present this way, so. And again, pronouns. Some people don't utilize pronouns, right? For me personally, working within this field for so long, I think pronouns are really important. I think pronouns are a way that we portray our identities, right? So utilizing your pronouns on your name tags, you know, back when we were doing Zoom, right? On Zoom handles, on your email signatures, just ways that you can be that safe person, maybe even a quiet safe person, right? A quiet advocate. That's a way you can do it by having your pronouns there. Introducing yourself with your pronouns, right? Sometimes that's awkward, right? Because you're not going to talk to someone always and say, hey, my name's Tony, I use you. Like, it's not always going to be that organic. And really listen with an open mind, learn all you can, believe the narrative that's in front of you, and again, try your hardest to use those correct pronouns, names, terms appropriately. Really just be an advocate, right? Be an advocate for change. Side tangent. I did, so during Pride Month, we go to a ton of different events. We did like 30, I think it was 32 counting this one, 32 different events throughout the month of June, right? So, and it was only 30 days. So you can imagine how crazy that was. And a lot of them ask us to speak, right? So we go out, we write a nice little Pride speech, whatever. And in my Pride speech this year, I really wanted to focus on the history of language, because I think that was so important. And there's little snippets where, you know, gender-inclusive language, right, and gender-expansive language was dated back to the 1300s, right, in the 1500s, right? So it's been there, right, for such a long time. So I think it's hard when people say, you know, this is new, right, or this is, it might be a little bit of a change from what we're used to, but it's been there for a elongated time. Now, it might look different back then, I totally get that, but there's still ways that we can kind of adapt, I think, which I think is important. We'll wait on that one. So I'm not going to dive deep into this, but I really just wanted to touch base quickly on the genderbread person. Has anybody seen the genderbread person? Yeah. So I think the genderbread person is really cool. I love it and hate it at the same time. Let me tell you why I don't like it. I'll start with what I like. I like it because it organizes our thoughts, right? It organizes what gender kind of looks like, right? And the spectrum of gender identity. Right, every human, we all have these 4 traits, right? Some look different to everyone, I totally understand that. It's not cookie cutter, it's not as plain and simple, but we all have these 4 traits in one way or the other. Right? We got gender identity, who you think you are exists in the brain. We all have gender expression, again, in one way or the other. How you demonstrate gender through the way you act, dress, behave, right, interact with others. Those biological sex, right, those objectively measurable organs, hormones, and chromosomes that, again, most of us possess in one way or the other. And again, attraction, which, you know, also known as sexual orientation, which some might not have sexual attraction or romantic attraction. I get that. But we all have some sort of attraction in one way or the other. So we all have these 4 traits, but none of them really have anything to do with one another. They kind of don't intertwine. They might, but not all of them do. So it kind of makes them a little bit different. That's why I like this. It's a visual representation of kind of what gender looks like. What I don't love is that it kind of puts things in like categories in a way, and it kind of does like an and or. Do you mind if I point you up real quick? Have you used the gender person before?
Yeah,
Do you like the and or, like the masculinity and femininity?
Yeah, it doesn't really do a good job of
Yeah.
doing something other than your binary.
Yes, yes,
But if
yes.
someone has no idea, it's a good place to start.
Exactly.
If you don't have a concept for that stuff.
Yep, so the new one, the 4.0, is a lot better than the old one. The old one used to literally say male, female, and it would just, yeah. So it's hard to kind of navigate that because then people are still kind of stuck in those boxes. So I still talk about this part, I just don't always train on the bottom part where it has like the spectrum thing, because I don't want people to have to feel like they're forced into a box. But it's still really important to utilize this and just kind of articulate this however we feel like we articulate this, right? It's a visual representation. So I don't want to go too deep into this because we could have a whole topic on this. But I just wanted to show you kind of what we train on and what we talk about when it comes to gender identity. So finishing up, just before we open it up for Q&A and resources, what to do if a youth comes out to you, right? What if your grandchild or your child or whatever youth you work with comes out to you? Be a trusted, supportive adult. Thank them for trusting you, to begin with. This one I love and hate at the same time. Acknowledge their courage, right? I think it's important right now, but I also think, why does that youth have to be courageous, right? Why does having to come out as something that isn't the default have to be courageous, right? Why can't it just be, hey, I'm me, right? It shouldn't have to be this theatrical thing sometimes. But I still think it is important to acknowledge that, you know, they were able to come out to you and have that conversation. Safety planning, again, whether it be a crisis safety plan, right, to make sure that they're safe, or whether it be like, who is a safe person to you, right, make that safety plan. If they want to come out to parents, family, friends, peers, whatever. Discuss safe and healthy relationships, super important, right? Risk reduction, right? How to make sure that you're safe, right? Suggest additional resources, send them to me, send them to the Trevor Project. There's so many resources online that are safe and accredited, right? That you can go to and say like, hey, if you're struggling, go to this research, right? Go to this website. I do think don't necessarily, I think it's great to do your own research, I think that's important. But if you Google LGBTQ plus resources, you're going to find like 45,000 pages of resources, right? So maybe utilizing one specific source, right? Or if you need something specific, you know, reach out. I can probably send that to you pretty quickly. But there are some navigations that I think is important that you do as a safety support adult. Probably one of the most important things I think is assuring that confidentiality, right? So in a way, without really saying it like this, you know, your secret is safe with me. Making sure that they know that you are a safe and supportive adult, that you're not going to go maybe tell their parent or their friend, etc. Let them know that you support them unconditionally. Right? Biggest thing we can do as supportive adults. We might not always agree with everything I just talked about. That's fine, but at least be a supportive person, right? And just know and let them know that you support them. It's the biggest thing we can do to safe and supportive adults. Not doing those. So. What I would love, I have my cards up there, you can grab them of course. That's my email, feel free to email me anytime. If you have any questions that you don't want to ask here, feel free to email me, I love answering those. Visit our website, we have a ton of information, we have a ton of stuff online. I will say our website is a little confusing to navigate just because we have so much going on. But if you need something specific, let me know. We have a parents and educators group as well. So we have an online group and we have an in-person group in our space. So educators and parents or grandparents as well are more than welcome to come to that group. It's always an open group. We always have food, which is great. And socials. I know Facebook is not for the youth anymore, but if you're, I know, I have to say that, it's crazy. No, I have a Facebook too, and I'm like, you don't have one? Like I tell our youth. So definitely check out Facebook. It's more for our parents, but it's okay. It's a cool way to kind of navigate what's going on and what we have. Instagram is also a great way. I post on there every day. We have a lot of followers, which is cool. Discord is only for our youth. Anybody that knows Discord, I was hesitant to get Discord because I don't love how it's just like an open forum sometimes. I know there's select servers. I made sure that we have all of the safety things checked off and we only have adults on to moderate and of course vetted adults. And it's only open during certain hours that our youth can get on. So it's not like they can just talk to anyone. They have to make sure they're on during certain hours. They have to follow the guidelines and the rules that we have, or else they're not going to utilize that. I say that because we have 11 to 17-year-olds on there, so we can see how that might get a little bit. So we make sure that we monitor that as much as possible. And if you have a youth that's older, within the ages of 18 to 23, we have a separate Discord for that. That's a little bit more open because our youth are older and they can really handle that, but it's still monitored. And everything's at North Shore NAGLY or NAGLY. Couple things over there. We always have interns and volunteer applications available. Those are rolling, so you just reach out to me and I can get you set up. So if you have a young person or if you're interested in interning, we can do that. We can go all the way from high school, 14 to 16, all the way up through master's level, usually psychology. I don't take social work just because I don't have a social work license, but I can take psychology. And then we have all of our counseling services over there. Everything's there. We have our group counseling. Our program sheet is over there as well. It's all up to date with summer programs that we have. Just some basic 101 knowledge and some mental health references as well. So that's kind of my spiel. I didn't want to go on too long, but feel free to ask any questions you all have. If you want to come up to me privately, you can do that. But I want to thank you all for coming out. I think this is a really important topic, and sometimes it's one of those topics that some people don't always agree with, right, when they come out to these. So I really thank you for coming out and listening, but also being an attentive group. So thank you. So any questions? I know I went over a ton of stuff.
I was really surprised by the statistic of the stuff.
Yeah.
I was like shocked.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I haven't been able to get it. I don't know if anybody, but I'm assuming you're a social worker. I'm just going to throw that out there.
I'm a private practice clinical social worker.
You might have an insight on this, but I've talked to a couple people and I'm not sure, from my knowledge, the correlation between the autistic community, people within the spectrum, and the LGBTQI plus community is the social dynamic, right? Is it something with the social aspect or is there another correlation to
You know, I'm not quite sure. There was like a really good presentation that I skimmed through. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
I think it's just because there's just something with the way the brain's wired.
Right. Yeah.
I was I have a client who's like an older, like zennial,
Yep.
and is still just super paranoid. I can't let anyone know I'm autistic or they'll take my tea away. And I'm like, I was even surprised about the 70%. I thought it was closer to like around 50, but I'm like, oh my god.
Yep.
All right.
Well, that was the other thing I was gonna say, is that something, because now autism is coming up more. Not when I was growing up, but, so, would that correlation have been the same? I mean, there was a lot of.
There's
Yeah.
there's
So I don't
something,
know.
It's a
there's
strong
something
correlation.
there that's
Yeah.
like a little bit more than just like awareness. It's
Yep.
like, yeah,
And I
I'm a clinician and I didn't
Exactly.
realize this other than I'm like,
Yeah.
why are all of my trans people like
Yeah.
autistic software programmers? Like,
It's so interesting. It's so interesting. And it's also interesting too, I want to make sure, I know we call it the spectrum, right? It's the ASD, right? It's autism spectrum. But we also do classify that as neurodivergent, right? Neurodivergent is ADD, right? ADHD. So we have a lot of youth who, are considered on that spectrum, but I think coming from yours, now that it is considered that spectrum, there's no more like Asperger's or anything like that. So I think maybe that's why it's a little bit more broad now, because the spectrum is so wide. So more people are getting that diagnosis of ASD. Yeah, more than that. Yeah. Any questions? Any other thoughts? Please.
So, thinking about this topic from the perspective of like a public institution,
Sure.
there's always we're always open to advice on how to balance being a safe and affirming space for the LGBTQ community, whether it's youth, whether it's adults, or whatever, and steering away from virtue signaling, right? We want to make sure we're staying on the right path. If you have any insight on, say what a space like a museum can do to.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a Pride Month thing, right? Having things like this, I think, is really important. But I think also, as you are obviously doing, having it for other marginalized communities too, right? I mean, I know I'm focusing on the LGBTQ plus community, obviously that's my job, but I think it's important to you know, have opportunities to have all different types of individuals come in, have different marginalized communities represented, because that's how it becomes more of a conversation, right? So, you know, I think having, again, visuals, having things like this, having people come in, I think that's a way that we can do it without it being too, like, washed over, because that's what we don't want. We work closely with the PBS Museum, right? We love them, we're doing an event with them tomorrow, and they're really great at making sure that they don't just throw money at us and that's it. Like we do events with them, like we do things. We have our kids go in and perform with some of the drag performers there, like as a cool, child-friendly environment, and it's not washed over, right? It's not like they're just saying like, here's some money, go do what you want with it. Like they're actually kind of speaking with like the mentality of, oh, I want to support this community in a way that I can. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
So we've had comments on our museum Facebook page about, not about this event, but other things that we posted during Pride Month. And always, there's always at least one.
It's gonna happen.
And
Yeah.
I was so happy that 2 of our followers just took it down. I didn't have to do a thing.
Yeah.
Because
gonna happen.
I don't,
Yeah.
you know, we have to maintain this public presence, we try to represent everybody in the community. I wasn't sure how to react to it, but when a couple of our other Facebook followers stepped up and made comments and said, and this is why we have Pride Month.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things where there's always going to be hate and rhetoric, right? I think, again, that's why we're working on that tolerance with our youth, right? I hate having to do it, but there's always going to be somebody that hates some sort of marginalized community, right? There's always going to be that stigma, and until we get into an environment that we just love everyone, right? That's not going to happen. So we get it too, right? I mean, I kind of run most of the social media too, so I'm constantly like, don't yell at me, but my self-care, right? Sometimes isn't the best. Like sometimes I'll go home and like check the NAGLY Instagram just to make sure there's no nasty comments or anything. So we're constantly doing that too. But I think it's important to make sure that, honestly, sometimes some of those stay so that people can defend us, right? I know that sounds kind of crazy to think of, but like at the same time, a lot of our supporters will jump in right away and make sure that that person knows, no, NAGLY is doing X, Y, and Z, right? They're there to support. So sometimes there is that weird, like, if it's blatant and if it's a horrible comment, obviously we delete and report it, but if it's something that's just like a disagreement or something like that, I usually let it kind of play out and see what happens. As long as our youth don't see it, that's what I don't want. But they normally don't, especially if it's on Facebook. So.
One of the things that's popped up in a lot of communities that, I mean, I'm probably reading it the wrong way, but it just for some reason irks me. It's the lawn signs, they say, you know, they have the pride flag on it, and they say something to the effect of you're welcome here. And for me, when I read it, it's like, well, like, where do you get permission? It's exactly.
Okay. Yeah,
It's the first thing that,
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think the mentality of those signs is just trying to be, again, what that person believes is an ally, right? Of that idea of like, everyone, no matter who you are, is welcome within this household. But I can see it from kind of that side too, like having a little bit more of a control of saying like, yeah, wow, okay, that's an interesting way to think of that. Okay.
So my thing is always like, and I didn't know this in my youth, but trying to analyze what's the intent. I think that changes it so much. With that person, like I have a lot of African people at my work that will say stuff about thick booty or thighs, and their intent is not.
Of course, yeah.
It's so different because of the culture. Yeah. And so when that's how I have to take a lot of things.
Yeah.
Is intent.
I think it's a great point. Yeah, I think recognizing what people's intent is, right? I mean, again, that's why we really talk about like the performative, right? We talk about performative activism. We talk about, is there something to back that up, right? Whenever I talk about, whenever I put those stickers out, you know, I kind of joke about it, but in a way, I kind of am serious too when I talk to staff members at school. Like, you know, with that sticker comes a responsibility, right? To make sure that you are supporting, again, not just this marginalized community, but all marginalized communities, right? So making sure that you hang that up proudly and you at least know, like, hey, I'm a supportive person, let me refer you to this person, or let's sit down and chat about this. I want to hear you out. So yeah, you know, the intent isn't always positive, right? But we try to look at intent as hopefully people having the right mind thought, I guess. So it was getting late, I couldn't think of that last word. Mind thought. It's like a 13-hour day.
I just noticed that my peace of mind was a lot different
Yeah.
when I changed that.
Yeah, well, I understand what their intent is, I just think that the way you're going about it probably isn't a little better. Just, you know, it came off to me as if they were, you know, white people, you know, straight white people, giving everybody else permission to exist.
I think that's why I love these. Right? Because it's true. It's like we talk about bias, right? We talk about our privilege, right? A lot of us have that, right? I know I have it, right? I'm a white cisgender. I grew up in a middle class community, right? I know. So it's really unpacking. One of these really was talking about privilege, and I think that's important to make sure we take a step back and identify our own privilege, right? And that's why there's really that difference between advocating as you represent a community, right, and advocating as an ally, right? We kind of separate those a little bit because we want to make sure that we give the LGBTQ plus voices their kind of voice first, like within our space, right? We say LGBTQ plus youth and allies. We say that because we want youth to feel comfortable in our space, no matter how they identify. As long as they're a good person and they support the community, they're more than welcome within our walls. Normally, the allies are ones that aren't fully out yet and not comfortable being their true authentic self. That's why we kind of term that a little. But I think it's important to notice and remind ourselves that there is a little bit of privilege there. And I don't say this directly, but most of our allies and our parents, right, that might be heterosexual, cisgender, right, they identify like, okay, I need to make sure that my child's voice comes first, right, or the LGBTQ plus youth that they serve, they come first. We have straight heterosexual volunteers that volunteer with us. And they all know, right? They're all on the same page. Like, nope, this adult advisor comes first because they are part of that community. We're going to work together, but they know that they don't represent that community. Is that kind of... Yeah. What else? These are all great questions and just discussion.
I'm just kind of curious about resources for like transition age youth who are like looking for work.
Sure.
So I don't know if you have any insight into that.
So, transitional age into 18?
Like I have one client who's 19, just graduated high school, has some mental health stuff, and it's just like, it's complicated. But they're just looking for some work, and like, I don't know if there's resources that help kids find jobs and have some supportive employment.
Yeah. So you definitely send them to I mean, not to plug this too much, but like our career building program works on resume building, works on finding jobs and bring ourselves out there. But there's also, you know, again, I don't know if this is Facebook, but there are some North Shore agencies that help with that. The North Shore Action Group, North Shore LGBTQ plus Action Group. That way you could literally post on there and say anonymously and say like, hey, I'm looking for an LGBTQ plus friendly part-time work environment. You know, if you're anonymous, you can post, hey, I do struggle with, you know, this mental health challenge, right? Do you know of anybody that is supportive within this community? So there are ways to reach out. I would definitely suggest to that client being as upfront without being too descriptive to that employer. So, you know what I mean? Like I would let them know, like, hey, I do have some mental health challenges. I am part of the LGBTQ plus community. I just want to make sure that you are aware of that before I apply or before we get started, just so they're fully aware that maybe that person needs breaks or, you know, stuff like that. So, but yeah, I don't have anything direct. I would say definitely check out, I would say send me an email and then I can send you some links. Yeah, it's hard. That's a tough transition. I actually have 2 youth right now who are looking for full-time employment. And Salem's very diverse, don't get me wrong, but there are still, unfortunately, some employees and employers that aren't super privy yet to working with youth who have some pretty severe mental health challenges. But there are some employers that are amazing and will take them and take them under their wing. So it's really just trying to navigate that. It's hard.
If your client happens to be in April, I do have a contact who does team like network programs.
Oh, yeah, they are in April.
Then
There you go.
I'll get you.
Connections. I love it.
Well, I came here tonight.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah, there's my self-care, I came to an
There you go.
educational
Yes.
networking thing, I
Hey,
know.
by the way, to get yourself get, Big Lots have these pride, masks, you put your mask on while you're in.
Oh, yeah. All right. I'm gonna get lots of pictures. See, sometimes performative. I'm just kidding. Sometimes it's good. That's awesome. What else we got?
We would love to do something at the museum for Pride Month.
Yes. Sure.
This year, the last 2 years, we have reached out to the Alliance Group at
Yep.
Behavioral High School. Unfortunately, they don't seem to have a consistent advisor. And last year, I communicated with 3 different advisors because they changed. And the last one, I must have emailed them 5 times and they didn't get back to me. But it doesn't necessarily have to be, Behavioral High School. We would like to get younger people. It does not have to be an exhibit. It could be open mic, poetry, something, art, games,
Yeah.
something I can't even think of or imagine on the spot. Yeah.
Yeah, the more we can empower our youth, the better. So the more we can give them something like, hey, this is your area, this is what we want to do for Pride Month, like, let's go to town. I will say, does anybody know NFI in Haverhill? You probably know NFI, right?
Yeah, I'm back in my community outreach days.
Right, okay, so NFI is a great therapeutic mental health. They do outsourcing, they have, they're literally right down the street. I did a training with them recently, and they're an amazing organization, but they serve a ton of LGBTQ plus youth. So maybe we can all connect and kind of make that work. I'd love to get more youth within the April, is this Merrimack Valley or is this North Shore?
Merrimack Valley.
Yeah, so within the Merrimack Valley to kind of contribute to that. The GSAs are hard, the gender sexuality alliances. Advisors are few and far between, which makes me very concerned because those are so important within schools. And it's really hard to find advisors who, teachers are pulled in so many different directions. So it's hard to find an advisor to commit to that. Because I actually did a training with Haverhill High School a couple of years ago, and I remember they were struggling with an advisor then.
Well, we have a whole year to think about
Yeah.
some cooperation next Pride Month or even before, anytime.
Yeah, like I said, I love doing these. These are fun for me, so it's nice to get out of the. I love the North Shore, but it's nice to get out a little bit, explore. Plus, you get the Merrimack Valley, Merrimack River right there. It's beautiful.
Maybe by then we'll have our patio extension and put that on a nice night.
That's beautiful.
The river view.
Yeah. I know. I was coming up here and it said to go right, but I noticed how tight that right turn was. I was like, I'm just going right.
Yeah.
Ran into a tree, so I decided to go around the other way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's
a
beautiful.
driveway.
Yeah. I made it work, but caught me off guard.
I'm kind of curious how you were talking to the kids about like the eco anxiety and like some of the political climate stuff, where there seems to be like maybe here is like safe enough, but like seeing things going on in other parts of the country. So I work mostly with adults. So it's,
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm a little worried about how I'm going to talk to our youth as we get closer. I think what I really try to talk to our youth about is, we want to make sure we have empathy and compassion for youth who might not have what we have here in Massachusetts, right? I don't want to necessarily compare our youth, because our youth are going through a lot just like other youth are going through, but we look at different things that have happened, right, in Oklahoma, right, with youth who have struggled. And I think it's important to make sure our youth know about it and they hear from us before they see it or hear it on the news. That's something we make sure we do. We always talk to our youth before they potentially hear it somewhere else, because we want to make sure they hear it from a safe and supportive person first. But there are times where I get worried and I'm like, well, what if this youth decides to go home and look this up and finds, unfortunately, right-wing TikTok or whatever, or things like that where it just becomes problematic. I always have open time, my office is always open door, so I let people know if you need to vent, if you need to talk about something, if there's something on the news that's bothering you, like come chat with me, come chat with a clinician. But it's tough to navigate. I think we do it as it comes up. The next Benedict case was one that was truly difficult for us, and that was difficult for me to talk to our youth about, especially when we didn't know all the details at the time. But I think we wanted to make sure we provided the right and accurate information. I did not want to cause hysteria either. So that's where it became a little bit challenging, because then we have youth saying, I heard this, we don't know all the details. We want to know that, unfortunately, youth tragically lost their life, and that's what we know right now. We know that Oklahoma, unfortunately, has no rights and responsibilities to protect LGBTQ plus youth, and that's really where it boils down to. So I talk a little bit about some of the privilege that we have, but I make sure that they know that we are still faced with challenges, right? We still have those challenges. But it's hard, it's case by case, definitely. I'm definitely getting a little bit worried, but we'll cross that bridge when it gets to it.
I joke that after with clients, it's like if it comes down to that, I will run the relocation center and be on the less bus out with the rest of you. So.
Yeah, it's hard. It's you know, we let youth know too. I mean, we have that openly gay governor, right? We have Kim Driscoll, who is an amazing human being as a lieutenant governor. They came to North Shore Pride. We got our picture taken with them. Our youth love them. So I think in Massachusetts we do kind of have a little bit of a bubble. But if it becomes a federal issue, then we might have some issues. But I think we're fortunate right now. I will say some of our parents are scrambling to get their kids into gender-affirming care, which scares me, that they're rushing to do this because they're scared. But I do want to make sure I tell people, like, we are pretty safe with which we have right now, as long as it doesn't become a federal law or anything like that. Yeah, please, I don't see that happening in the near future.
That's why I was curious about those statistics. I was wondering if that's like a lot,
Yeah, I mean, it could be, there's so many variants. Yeah, I think, when I didn't pull the 2020 data, obviously, because that's a little bit outdated, but during that presidential election and political climate, the numbers skyrocketed of suicide attempts, contemplations. You know, the counseling aspect wasn't there per se, but I think at that point we were tracking suicidality, because that was like right at the beginning of COVID. So that was a little bit challenging, but yeah, I mean, all of those things play a role, unfortunately. So we just talk to our kids about, you know, having a safe space, knowing that they can come to NAGLY, knowing they can go to, you know, other safe spaces. I mean, if you walk down Salem, it's literally like just gay threw up in downtown. I mean, there's pride flags everywhere, right? Which is amazing. I love it. So luckily, we're a pretty safe and supportive space. We still have our issues. We had kids yesterday, for instance. I don't think they were targeting us, but there's a little. Has anybody been to the City Hall? Yeah, it's pretty gross mall. I get it. It's old, but there's a stair.
It's got a great pizza shop.
It does. Essex Pizza is amazing. We actually have a contract with them. So there's a little staircase that goes up to a school, actually. And some kids like to migrate on that staircase, which is right above our space. And there was a group of kids, we call them the bike kids, the biker kids, and they rolled up and they were like throwing candy off the staircase, and they hit our executive director when he was leaving. So obviously we're not saying like this is a hate crime, but like we're still understanding that like maybe it could have been targeted. We don't know, but it's like little things like that where I was like, guys, you need to leave now, or else we're gonna call Salem police, whatever. And they said some things that were a little off cuff, and I'm like, I just don't want our youth to hear that. I can take it, but I don't want our youth to hear it. So it does still happen, even in safe and affirming environments. What else? This is a great conversation. Well, feel free. I'm going to stay for a couple more minutes if you want to chat with me privately, obviously. Grab some wristbands. Again, grab some candy. They're really good. Leftover from Saturday. They're still good.
Snacks.
There's snacks too. Yes.
Snacks.
Grab some tattoos. They're not permanent, I promise. Other stickers. Just grab some stuff, please. I don't want to take all of this home, so grab what you can. Seriously though, thank you all for coming. I know this was a small crowd, but I actually like smaller, intimate environments. I think it makes the conversation better. So I really appreciate you guys.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Steve.